Welcome to Meadology Week 4, where we talk about that wacky chemical, dihydrogen monoxide. Hello, Steve, Canadian Sasquatch, coming at you with Meadology Week 4, where it's water. Yep, water. H2O, dihydrogen monoxide, is what we're talking about today. Why does water get its own week? What's the third main ingredient in mead? You've got honey, you've got yeast, and you've got water. And it takes all three to make mead. There's quite a few things that you need to know about water. Because if you have water that tastes nasty, chances are you're going to have a mead that tastes nasty when you're done. Just like honey and yeast, quality does matter when it comes to your water. If you have tasty tap water, then you probably can go ahead and use it. But there might be things in your water that, even though you can't taste them now, may throw off some off flavors towards the end of it. In the US and Canada, they add stuff to the water to make it healthy and clean. Things like chlorine and chloramines. Most of you have heard of chlorine. We even touched a bit about it in week 1 when we were talking about sanitizing things with the water and bleach. And if you have chlorine in your water, it's fairly easy to remove. You can use a charcoal filter to get rid of most of it, or just let it sit out overnight in an open container, and most of the chlorine will dissipate that way. Chloramines, though, you might not have heard of this before. It's a newer thing that a lot of places are starting to add to their water instead of chlorine. It does the same job as keeping things clean by killing off the bugs, but it's one key factor that most places like, and what we don't like, is it's a lot harder for it to be removed from the water. It is a lot more stable than just straight up chlorine in the water, so it won't just dissipate overnight like chlorine does, and it's harder to filter out. So you do have to do a little bit of extra filtering to get it out of your water. But lucky for us mead makers, we have one thing in our arsenal that'll help us out. Good old sodium metabisulfates. If you mix some in with the water that's got the chloramines, leave it sit overnight, then it will react with the chloramines, and then it will dissipate out. Similar to just leaving the chlorine sit out by itself. This time you have to add something to make it work. Here in Houston, we have chloramines in our water, and I should mention that I do not like our tap water until after it has been filtered fairly well. We have a decent filter on our fridge that pulls off a lot of the bad flavors that are in water, so I don't use it. But I have done tests with brewing beer where I've used straight up tap water that's been filtered, tap water that's been treated with sodium metabisulfites, spring water, and RO or reverse osmosis water. To me, the results were very eye-opening. I could definitely tell the difference of the untreated tap water. It was just absolutely disgusting when I was done with it. Then after that, the water that was treated with the sodium metabisulfates, it was a little better, but it still wasn't drinkable to me. The filtered water was a little bit better, but again, I kind of ended up dumping most of those out. The reverse osmosis water, that was quite a bit better, but my tastes go for the spring water. I could definitely tell that it was a better product when I was done with it using the spring water. And typically I use Ozarka spring water, but like I showed at the beginning of, I guess it'd be at the end of week 1 when we started making the Joe's Ancient Orange, I was using store brand spring water. That's all you need. It's cheap. It was 88 cents for that 1 gallon container. I hear you guys asking, what is RO water or reverse osmosis? Well, it's essentially a way of filtering out just about everything in your water, almost to the point of being distilled, but it still leaves some of the minerals in that behind. But it does not work on its own to get out chloramines effectively. So if you have chloramines in your water, you need a pre-filter for everything to work nicely, and it can actually muck up your RO filter if you don't pre-filter for it. But it's very close to distill, just leaves just a little bit of the minerals behind. And after doing these tests with the beer, it made a lot of sense to me on how the best quality water that I was using at the start also produced the best quality beer at the time at the end, because the flavors pass through. In beer you do boiling and all that stuff, and some of that contributes to the other off flavors that can be produced with some of this stuff. But in mead, it will also pass through some of the tests. I haven't done the test myself because it was just such an eye-opener doing the mead or the beer test that I don't want to waste the time doing it with mead. I just use the better quality water. Best quality water that I can get my hands on, that's what I'm going to use. It is definitely worth it after waiting so many months after everything is done. Now back to distilled water. This is where you boil the water, catch the steam, and convert it back into liquid by cooling it down. This might seem like a great idea because there's nothing left in the water for off flavors. But again, distilled water doesn't taste all that great. Why? Because it's missing the minerals and stuff that are naturally in water, and these are what typically make the water taste good. Also, the yeast really like those minerals as well. It helps them do what yeast do, which is what we learned last week: produce alcohol and CO2 and multiply. So be it humans or fungus, distilled water isn't all that great. As such, distilled water is only really good for making large batches of sanitization fluids, just like we learned back in week 1, where I make the 5-gallon batches and let it sit around for months on end without a problem. Hot water. Do we really want to use it? I mentioned in week 1 how the hot water from the tap in the US and Canada is quite sanitary and safe for rinsing and such. The problem is well, it's hot. We don't want all that heat when making mead. Remember how heat helps the delicate flavors and aromas escape from the honey, and when we talked about it in week 2? Remember how in week 3 we talked about how heat kills the yeast? Yeah, hot water really isn't our friend here. It's best suited for when we're done and need to wash things. Even then, it's not even really required. Things like PBW, powdered brewery wash, doesn't need to be hot, just warm. So let's leave the hot water to rinsing off the chlorine when we're sanitizing things. That way we stick to the good tasting water. Something I haven't touched on yet is well water. This is where you get your water from a hole in the ground. This is usually where the best tasting water really comes from, since it's not been stripped of its minerals or doused in chemicals to kill off any bugs or anything in there. But you do need to make sure that it doesn't have bad things in it, like heavy metals that come from the ground, or if there's a farm up the mountain or whatever, that they're not dousing their fields with chemicals that end up in your well water. But if you have a well, then you probably already know all about this and don't need to know that you really should get it tested by a water lab to see what's in it. As for me, as I stated, spring water is from the store is what I use when I brew. It's fairly inexpensive and it tastes good, and I get really good results from it. And with that, my friends, we conclude week 4, which means we are now over halfway done. And speaking of, I would like to invite you to thumbs up this video if you've enjoyed it. And if you haven't yet, I'd also like to invite you to subscribe so that you can continue to watch my videos as they come up. These Meadology Week videos will come out weekly on Mondays. And of course, we are drinking mead during the Meadologies session. This here is my prickly pear melomel. It didn't keep the beautiful color of the prickly pears, but it definitely smells and tastes like a prickly pear. And if you don't know what that smells like or tastes like, then I am sorry indeed. But it does have a very floral, perfumey aroma to it. The best way I could describe it is if you walked into a meadow of wildflowers and just enjoyed that. I also used mesquite honey with this. And yeah, the flavor of this actually does follow the nose, so it does taste like that perfumey, flowery, fruity taste. And if you, like I mentioned, had ever had prickly pear, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. So cheers, my friends, and remember, be sure to have a pint of awesome, because I know I will.